Well, thank you for joining us on What If Jesus Was Serious. We're just going to talk about chapter 4 this time. This is If Jesus Was Serious, then we will make room to cry.
Wow. I thought being a Christian, you were supposed to be happy all the time. And I think that's an idea that has been around for a while. Where do we kind of get this idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time?
Well, I mean, I think one, we want to be happy. I mean, it's a good feeling. But
Sure.
two, I think that is probably a very cultural understanding. We definitely are now in a very self-help culture. We want to be happy. We want to be fulfilled in that happiness, and that's a really, I don't know. That is a huge industry. Period.
Yep.
You go to the bookstores. I think it's one of a lot of the best selling books are some sort of self
That's right.
help book, which is about you know how do I get to a place of kind of sustainable happiness.
Yeah. And I think we see Jesus as a self help. And
Oh
we
yeah,
hear things about him being, victory. He's has victory over death and evil, and he healed the sick, and he mends the brokenhearted. And I think he's presented as a solution to our problems if we, follow his method, kind of thing. And in actual fact, if we are part of the kingdom of heaven, he is the solution to the problem. But
yeah.
I think what the sort of problem with that thinking is that it's not always the way we expect it to be. We expect it
Well,
to end up in happiness and be delivered from all our problems. But that's really not the way life is really like.
and I think it's like first I'm gonna maybe say this just in case everyone's mistaken what we think. That does not mean we don't think Jesus doesn't want us happy. I do
Yeah.
believe that is something he wants. But it's not something he promised that, hey, life is just going to be happy. He actually promised suffering.
Yeah.
There's something you're going to go through.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think what happens is because of, we want happiness in our life. And again, that's not a bad thing. Um, but it's just, I think what happens is we've kind of made that into, that's what ultimately Jesus is desiring for us,
Hmm.
as opposed to he's wants something even deeper for us in the
Yeah. And I think
reality
we
of the
talked
world.
about this in the last chapter 3. What he wants for us is the best thing for us, which is a transformed life, which is
Hmm.
not necessarily being happy all the time, because life is full of different conditions and emotional states. And I think even the way we do church in this century, we tend to think of it as sometimes as a celebration. So it tends to be very upbeat and energetic. And I think the message that comes across, without actually saying anything, just by the way we act, is that that's what the Christian life is like as well.
Yeah, that's right. And it is very much what's even becomes a part of our worship. Is it's very joyful and exuberant. And the truth is, the Bible doesn't read like that.
No.
There are definitely times
Yep.
of celebration and joyful. Absolutely. Anyone who's thinking right now, does that mean it's not supposed to be that? No, stop them thinking. Absolutely, there are times of celebration and joyfulness. But if we look at the Psalms, which would have been a book used in Jesus' time, to this time too, as a prayer book and worship liturgy, and it includes celebration, but also lament, complaint, anger, cries of justice, for justice. Like
Hmm.
it's. I think we missed out. The whole point is that his desire for us is to be present in our lives, not just that we're happy, but to be present as we go through the things that life
Yeah. So
brings
our
to us.
relationship with God can have many dimensions. So again, this starts off with one of the blessed statements: "Blessed are those who mourn." Now, typically, we think of that as experiencing grief, and usually through the loss of a or the death of a loved one. But I think um, in Michael J. Wilkins in the NIV application commentary says that the loss of anything a person counts valuable will produce mourning, whether it's financial support or loved ones, our status in society, or even our spiritual standing before God. all of those things, if we lose something or we count it as valuable, then there is a potential for a state of mourning or grief.
Oh, absolutely. And I think because, probably another reason why we want the idea of happy is as people go through that, as we go through it, but as people go through it, it's uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Like it's not a pleasant feeling. It's not pleasant to go through. It's not pleasant to have friends or close relatives or whatever go through it. And I think it's like, we got to get to happiness. We got to get to happiness.
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of like, again, mourning, was it, cry with those who cry, mourn with those who mourn, you know, um, just kind of be with them, be present with them. And that's so
Hmm.
much the heart of God
Yeah. So we
is,
actually, I think Paul said that in Romans 12:15. We actually share in another person's grief. Someone
yeah,
else has experienced the loss, but we can share in their grief, and that actually brings comfort to them. And that's a picture
absolutely.
of God as well. I think that he, by sharing in our grief, not just necessarily fixing the problem immediately, we develop a stronger bond and a closer relationship.
Well, and this is, I mean, we can include grief in this, even though this quote by Esau McClellan, which I actually really, really love, he brings out doubts and disappointments, but grief too. But it says sometimes we need to worship in the presence of our doubts and disappointments
Yeah.
to remind them who reigns. But it's just, we have to acknowledge, these things, and they can be such an important part of our prayer life and our worship life. Is just, again, to acknowledge that grief
Hmm.
and to take that time to do that and to worship in the presence of that.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I heard a pastor named Bruxy Cavey say was that it's about belief. You don't doubt in something that you don't believe in. So the example he used was unicorns. I don't believe in unicorns. I don't ever doubt that I don't believe in unicorns. I just don't believe in unicorns.
Right.
But I do believe in God, but sometimes I doubt the specific part of our relationship or what the Bible means, kind of thing.
Hmm.
I doubt what that means or how to apply it, but that doesn't mean I don't believe in God. I only doubt when I truly do believe in something.
Right.
I think that captures that thought
Absolutely.
really well. You were talking about there, and I think that our but the Jesus' teachings doesn't end with just grief. Um,
No.
there's always grief with hope. And I had found a quote from Karen Huber in the Influence magazine from a couple years back, and it says, "Yes, it's true that we do not grieve as those without hope. But we do grieve all the same.
Yeah.
Yes, joy comes in the morning, but the morning may not dawn for a while. So we have to go through our grief, but we still have hope."
That's right. That's
I
right.
think the big takeaway there is that God is still with us when we mourn.
Right. And again,
But
I
that
think
we,
that going back to, what we talked about for chapter 3, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Again, it's this idea of it's present, it's here, it's right now.
Mhm.
And again, that's God's desire, is to be here present with us, especially in those times of mourning and grief.
Yeah, that's true. And again, even Jesus, you alluded to this before, that Jesus said for us to expect to even suffer, which is a
Yep.
kind of loss, will cause us to mourn. Um, and that's because we live in a broken world after the fall, when Adam and Eve decided to take things into their own hands and decide right and wrong for themselves, that our world was fundamentally changed, and we should expect that we're going to experience grief and sorrow and suffering. But we don't, because of the kingdom of heaven now that's overlapped and God is now present with us, uh,
Mhm.
we don't mourn without hope. So, what hope do we have?
Well, the hope is literally to be in the presence of God.
Hmm.
I think that is sometimes the thing that we can forget so much. Um, I know I do. It's sort of like, I think sometimes the hope is in, you know, the life changing into this great way that's going to really benefit me. And I'm not saying that that can't happen, but the ultimate hope we have is is the ability to be with God.
Hmm.
He is there with us.
Yeah, and I think Jesus, when he's sort of kicked off his ministry, he's in his hometown. He gets up in his local synagogue where everybody knows him. He's Mary's boy. You know, he worked with his dad, who was the carpenter. And Jesus quotes Isaiah 61, and he's talking about all of the stuff, all of the people that were kind of mentioned in the blessed R's, the poor and the people who live challenged lives and those who are marginalized. And he said that the kingdom of heaven was going to bring to those people hope and encouragement. And then he makes his bold statement that he's the one that's going to do that, that's going to start it. And I think it's referred elsewhere in John as in the book of John, written by Jesus' best friend, that he refers to that as an abundant life. And I think that's something that we can hope to experience now, being a follower of Jesus. But not just that. There's also a future hope.
Well, and you kind of taking on even a little bit of what was covered in chapter 1 and 2 of this book. The idea again of the poor, all that sort of that kind of idea. The people that we don't expect, often the people that can be invisible. And I think there's even in grief, sometimes when we're going through it, even though we'll find out, we're never really alone, but sometimes you can feel like I'm going through this, and loneliness can be such a part of that. Some
Mm-hmm.
of that hope, and then the idea of, like, again, mourn, mourn with those who are mourning and grieve with those who are grieving, um, is that we're not alone and we're seen. Because sometimes that's just the big thing. It's not that
That's
someone
right.
wants grief or what they're going through fixed right away. They sometimes just the beauty of just being, hey, you see me. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's another hope we got to remember that, is sort of even through this first little part of the Sermon on the Mount, it is the whole idea that God is saying, I see you. And then encouraging us to say, we need to be saying the same thing if we're
Yeah.
citizens of heaven.
Yeah. And then one of the supplemental readings for this chapter is Revelation 21, where Jesus talks about, where Skye talks about the book of Revelation, where he talks about a full restoration, where the kingdom of
Mm.
heaven and the earthly reality we live in are completely overlapped again, and we have full restoration back to the way it was that God intended in the first place, but better. It's gone from a garden to a city, and that is our future hope.
Yeah.
Okay, again, that ends our time for today. So, again, if you would take the time to answer the questions that are in the course outline for you there, and you can answer them personally, put the answers in there. And then again, when you get together with your missional community, you can compare notes and answer the questions or talk about the questions together. Thanks for joining us again.